Home Studio Start podcast.
Welcome to the deep dive.
Great to be here.
Today we're cutting through the noise on a really key decision for any home studio.
Yeah, choosing the right studio monitors. It's a big one.
Exactly. And we're zooming in on that classic active versus passive debate. We really want to make it, well, crystal clear for you.
Good goal.
And our whole deep dive today, it's inspired by a fantastic guide from Rodrigo Marquez over on the Home Studio Start blog.
Yeah, Rodrigo's stuff is great. Home recording made easy.
Yeah.
Right. That's the slogan.
That's the one. And his article promises to make this whole monitor decision super clear.
And it's so important because, your monitors, they're basically your ears in the studio.
Right. They're how you hear everything.
Precisely. They're like the window to your sound. And if that window's dirty or distorted, well, all your hard work might just sound weird somewhere else.
Yeah, you mix it perfectly in your room, then play it in the car, and disaster.
Happens all the time. So getting your mix to sound good everywhere else, it really starts with accurate monitoring right there in your studio.
Okay.
And like we said, there are basically two main ways these monitors are set up, two architectures that kind of dominate things. Each one's got its own distinct advantages.
All right, let's jump straight in then. And maybe start with what a lot of people see as the more streamlined choice, active studio monitors.
Makes sense. They're often seen as the simple option.
People call them the easy button almost.
Yeah, and for good reason.
Yeah.
What makes a monitor active is that it has its own amplifier built right inside the speaker cabinet.
Okay, so amp included.
Exactly. Unlike passive monitors, which need a totally separate amplifier to power them.
Gotcha.
And this active design, it gives you a couple of really big benefits right away. First, it just makes your setup way simpler.
Less gear cluttering up the desk.
Total. Fewer boxes, fewer cables. Nice and clean.
Okay.
But maybe even more important is performance. Optimal performance.
How so?
Well, the manufacturer gets to perfectly match that built-in amplifier to the speaker parts. The drivers, the crossover.
Right, because they designed them all together.
Exactly. It's a cohesive system. So you don't have to stress about impedance matching or figuring out the right wattage.
Yeah, that can get confusing.
It's all pre-engineered for the best clarity and frequency response. They're basically plug and play.
So you just connect them to your audio interface?
Yep. Connect to your interface or mixer, plug into the wall for power, and you're pretty much ready to go.
That does sound like an easy button, especially maybe for beginners who just want to get started quickly.
Definitely. Think of Sarah, a singer-songwriter maybe. She just wants to record her ideas, get a good mix fast. Active monitors let her set up super quick. No messing with complex wiring. She can just focus on the music.
Makes sense. But are there any downsides? What are you giving up with that all-in-one approach?
That's a fair question. It really comes down to trade-offs. Okay. The big one is flexibility.
Okay.
Because everything's integrated, right? So let's say you wanted to try out a different amplifier because you heard it had a really specific warm sound.
You couldn't do that.
Nope. With active monitors, you're stuck with the amp that's inside. And thinking longer term, if that internal amp fails, yeah, you might need to repair the whole speaker unit or maybe even replace it entirely. That could be trickier than just swapping out a separate external amp if you had a passive setup.
That's a really good point for, down the road. Okay, practical tips then. If someone does go for active monitors, what's the key thing to remember setting them up?
Simple but vital safety tip.
Yeah.
Always start with the volume knob on the speaker itself. Turn down low before you power it on or play any sound.
Right, avoid that sudden blast.
Exactly. And make sure you're connecting them to the line outputs on your interface or mixer, not like headphone outs or something else. Protects your ears, protects your gear.
Good advice. So, okay, if your main goal is a quick, no-fuss setup so you can just focus on making music, active monitors sound like a really solid bet.
For sure. They definitely fit that need well.
But there is that other side of the coin, right?
Absolutely. While active offers that convenience, there's this whole other approach that lots of audio folks really, really like. Passive studio monitors.
The old school way, as Rodrigo puts it in his guide.
Yeah, kinda.
Yeah.
And the defining thing is they absolutely need a separate power amplifier. Without one, they just sit there silently.
So the immediate question is, why bother with the extra box and cables?
Right. And the answer really is flexibility and customization.
Okay, tell me more.
With passive monitors, you get to choose your amplifier separately. You can pair different amps with different speakers.
So you can mix and match.
Exactly. You can really tailor your sound. Maybe you want an amplifier that's super clean and transparent for critical mixing. Or maybe you find this cool vintage amp that adds a specific warmth, a bit of character that you really like for your style of music.
I I see. You get more control over the whole sound chain.
Precisely. That level of control is a huge draw for a lot of people. And there's another angle, too.
Upgrades.
Upgrades. How so? Well, it allows for a staged upgrade path.
Yeah.
You could buy a really solid pair of passive speakers now, maybe with a more budget-friendly amp to start.
Okay.
Then later on, when you have more budget or your needs change, you can upgrade just the amplifier. And that can make a really significant difference to your sound quality without having to ditch your speakers.
That's smart. Sort of spreading the cost out or just evolving your setup over time.
Exactly. But of course, this flexibility means more gear. You need the speakers, you need the amplifier, and you need the right kind of speaker cables to connect them.
Right. More components to manage.
Definitely.
So it sounds like passive is maybe for the producer who has a very specific sound goal in mind, or maybe they have like a favorite old piece of gear they want to use.
That's a perfect example. Imagine Mark, a producer who's really into analog synths.
Okay.
And maybe he inherited this amazing vintage power amp from like the 70s that has this really unique, warm, almost cinematic sound.
Yeah.
With passive monitors, Mark can actually use that specific amp in his monitoring setup. He can get that unique character coming right out of his speakers.
Which he absolutely couldn't do with active monitors.
No way. That's the kind of deep customization that pulls people towards passive setups.
Okay, so what are the crucial things to get right if you go down the passive route, especially with that separate amplifier?
Okay, two really critical things here. First, choosing the amp. You have to match its power output, the wattage, to what the monitors are rated to handle.
Why is that so important?
Well, if the amp is too weak, doesn't have enough power, you might push it too hard trying to get volume. It can start clipping.
Clipping, that's bad, right? Sounds distorted.
Very bad. It's harsh distortion. And it can actually damage both the amplifier and your speakers.
Huh.
But on the flip side, if the amp is way too powerful,
You could blow the speakers.
easily, especially the delicate parts inside, like the voice coils. So proper power matching is key for clean sound and just keeping your gear safe long term.
Got it. Match the wattage. What's the second thing?
Cables. Always use proper speaker cables.
Not guitar cables.
It's definitely not guitar cables or patch cables. They look similar sometimes, but they're built differently. Speaker cables are designed to carry the higher power signal from the amp to the speakers. Using the wrong kind will sound bad and could potentially cause problems too.
Okay, good to know. Use real speaker cables.
Absolutely.
So it really feels like passive monitors are for the tinkerers, the experimenters, or people planning that more modular, long game studio build.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it. It's about building your system piece by piece, customizing it just how you want it.
Okay, so we've explored active, we've explored passive. Let's kind of bring it all together now and do a direct comparison, because like Rodrigo says, it really just comes down to where the amplifier lives, right?
Pretty much. Active, amps built in.
Yeah.
All-in-one convenience. Passive. Needs a separate amp. More modular, more flexible.
Right. And that one difference leads to a bunch of practical things you need to think about for your studio.
Exactly. Let's maybe start with cost, because that can be a bit tricky.
Okay. How does cost compare?
Well, a pair of active monitors might look more expensive on the price tag initially,
Right.
but you have to remember that price includes the speakers and an amplifier that's perfectly matched to them.
Ah, okay. Bundled deal.
Yeah. With passive monitors, you buy the speakers, which might look cheaper,
Uh-huh.
but then you also have to buy a separate amplifier plus the speaker cables. So the total cost for a decent passive set of speakers plus a good amp can actually end up being higher than a comparable active system.
That's really interesting. I think a lot of people assume passive is always cheaper because the speaker boxes themselves cost less.
It's a common trap. And the biggest pitfall there is people finding, say, great passive speakers on sale.
Yeah.
And then they cheap out on the amplifier just to save money. They get an underpowered or just low-quality amp.
And that ruins the whole point.
Completely. It totally kneecaps the performance of those nice speakers. And like we said, could even damage stuff. The synergy between the amp and speakers in a passive system is absolutely crucial. You got to budget for both properly.
Okay, so cost can be deceiving. What about just pure simplicity and convenience?
Oh, active wins that hands down. No contest.
Fewer boxes, fewer cables.
Way less hassle setting things up. It's just a much more straightforward experience, especially if you're not super technical or just want to get going fast.
Right. But then the flip side is flexibility and upgrades, right? That's where passive shines.
Exactly. That's the passive advantage. You get that freedom to mix and match amplifiers, to really experiment with the sound of your monitoring chain. An amp can change the character quite a bit.
So you could try a really clean amp, then maybe a warmer one later.
Precisely. Or, like we talked about, you can upgrade just the amp down the line when your budget allows or your taste evolves without needing brand new speakers. More options long term.
Okay, let's try to illustrate that trade-off. Imagine two people setting up studios. David just wants to start his podcast, like now.
Okay.
He grabs some active monitors, plugs them into his interface. Boom. He's probably mixing his first episode that afternoon.
Super fast, super easy.
Then there's, let's say, another Sarah. Different Sarah. She found some really nice old passive speakers, maybe got them cheap, but her budget for an amp right now is tight.
Right.
So she finds a decent, maybe entry-level amplifier that works. Her setup takes a bit more wiring, a bit more effort initially. But she knows that in a year or two, she can save up and buy a much better amplifier, and suddenly her already good speakers will sound even better.
Exactly. It's a strategic move. She gets a potentially significant sound improvement just by upgrading one component.
So it really highlights the core difference, doesn't it? Active for speed and simplicity now.
Yep, and passive for that long-term flexibility and potential for customization or staged upgrades.
It really comes down to what you value most in your studio journey.
Absolutely. There's no single right answer. It's about your priorities.
Which leads us perfectly into the big question. How do you, the listener, choose the right monitor for your studio?
Yeah, because like we've been saying, it's not one size fits all.
You can't just buy what your favorite producer uses and expect it to work perfectly for you.
Definitely not. Your specific needs, your budget, and maybe most importantly, your room. The acoustics, the size, these are the things that really matter.
Okay, let's break down those factors. Room size, why is that so critical?
It's huge. If you've got a small bedroom studio, putting massive monitors in there is usually a bad idea, whether they're active or passive.
Why is that? Too much bass.
Yeah, you'll likely get tons of bass buildup and reflections because the sound waves don't have space to properly develop. It makes the bass sound muddy and inaccurate.
So smaller room, probably smaller monitors.
Generally, yes. Near-field monitors are designed for listening up close, which works much better in smaller spaces. You minimize those problematic room reflections.
Okay, room size is key, then budget, we touched on that.
Right. Remember the total cost. Active includes the amp. Passive means budgeting for speakers, amp, and cables. Sometimes passive can be pricier overall, unless you find good used gear maybe.
And then workflow. What do you mean by that?
Just how you like to work. Do you want the absolute simplest plug-and-play setup? Or do you actually enjoy the idea of swapping components, maybe trying different amps later on?
Like, are you a set it and forget it person or a tinkerer?
Exactly. Do you see yourself wanting to upgrade just the amp or just the speakers in the future? That points towards passive. If you just want it to work reliably now, active might be simpler.
Let's use another example. Say Maya. She's converted a closet into a little vocal booth.
Okay, tiny space.
Yeah, and she does all her mixing and editing in her small bedroom right at her desk. She needs monitors that fit, sound good up close, and are super easy to manage.
Right. Minimal hassle.
For Maya, the choice seems pretty clear, doesn't it?
Absolutely. A pair of smaller, active near-field monitors would be perfect. They fit the space, they're designed for close listening, setup is dead simple.
The whole active versus passive thing is kind of a no-brainer for her situation.
Totally. Active fits her needs perfectly.
Okay, so those are the factors. Any final essential tips for someone actually making the choice?
Yeah, a few crucial ones. First, if you possibly can, listen to monitors in your own room, or at least a room that's acoustically similar.
Not just the big demo room at the store.
Right. They can sound totally different in your actual space because of reflections and room modes. What sounds amazing in the store might sound boomy or harsh at home.
Good point. What else?
Budget for acoustic treatment. Seriously. Bass traps, absorption panels. Whatever monitors you buy, active or passive, they won't sound accurate if your room acoustics are terrible.
So treatment is just as important as the monitors themselves.
Often more important, especially in typical home studio rooms. It makes a massive difference. Don't blow your whole budget on monitors and leave nothing for treating the room.
Okay, solid advice. And the last tip.
Just reinforcing the size thing. Match the monitor size to your room size. Don't put giant speakers in a tiny room expecting amazing results. You'll likely just get inaccurate bass and an overwhelming sound. Smaller near fields are often better for smaller spaces.
Got it. So really, the goal here isn't to tell people what to buy.
Nope.
It's about giving you the knowledge to figure out what's best for your specific situation.
Exactly. Empowering you to make that informed choice.
So we've really covered a lot of ground today, digging into studio monitors, breaking down active versus passive.
Yeah, we looked at how active monitors give you that all-in-one convenience, amp built right in.
Yeah.
Great for simplicity, quick setup.
Right. And then how passive monitors offer that flexibility, that customization potential with separate amps. Appealing if you like to tweak or plan upgrades down the line.
And we kept coming back to how crucial your own situation is, your room, your budget, how you like to work. Those are the things that really guide the decision.
Absolutely. And that really hammers home the main takeaway from this whole deep dive, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think so. Which is that this passive versus active thing, there's no single winner.
No universal best.
Nope. The best monitors are simply the ones that work best for you, the ones that fit your space, fit your workflow, and let you hear your music accurately so you can make great stuff.
Well said. So, now that you, listening, are armed with all this knowledge, what's sticking out to you?
Yeah, what makes the most sense for your setup?
And like Rodrigo Marquez suggests with his whole home recording made easy approach, now's the time to actually put this into action.
Yeah, definitely. Start researching specific models, maybe read some reviews.
And most importantly, if you can, try to actually listen to different monitors. Ideally in a space kind of like yours.
Yeah, hearing is believing when it comes to speakers.
Think about it. What unique sounds could you unlock? What improvements could you make just by really understanding and choosing the right monitoring setup for you?
It's a foundational part of your studio.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive.
My pleasure.
Until next time, happy mixing.